Hi everybody, I'm Mike Staver. This is Mondays with Mike, a weekly video series where I answer questions from people just like you. Here's this week's question. Very important question for you to pay close attention to and forward it to your friends. Dear Mike, I own a multi-generational family company that was devastated by the economic downturn. Over the last 2 years, we have managed to get it stabilized, but the emotional and financial toll on me personally is significant and has at times been overwhelming. I am anxious all the time and never feel truly happy. With the death and suicide of Robin Williams, it occurred to me, with all the press around depression, and as I looked at the symptoms for serious depression that I saw in the news, it occurred to me that I may have serious or major depression. I am struggling to stay motivated, and it is difficult for me to get through the day, even though I seem to perform at reasonably successful levels. Any thoughts that you could share would be helpful during this difficult time. First of all, I'm very sorry about your devastation, and I'm sorry to hear that the economic downturn has taken such a personal toll on you. There's a lot of misinformation out there about depression. Depression is the common cold of mental illness. All of us in our lives are going to get depressed. Some of us are going to get seriously depressed. Some of us are going to get clinically depressed. We're all going to get depressed. It's just a matter of degree of the depression. Because of our ancestors, maybe your grandparents, your great-grandparents, or otherwise, there's been a stigma attached to people who have anxiety or depression or some kind of mental illness or challenge. The first thing I think that you've done is the right thing, and that's admit or acknowledge that there may be the possibility that you have significant depression. If you're having a hard time getting through the day, if you feel a lot of anxiety, if you lack motivation, all of which you have suggested, then it is likely that you're suffering from some form of depression. But this doesn't mean that something is wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you have a problem. It doesn't mean that you need to be fixed. And it certainly doesn't mean that you need to be surrounded by people who ridiculously try to happy talk you or encourage you to look at all the great things in your life. That is not going to help depression. Any more than somebody saying, just don't sneeze and you won't have a cold. There's a lot of misinformation. So there's a couple of things I want to suggest that you do. First of all, I want to acknowledge you for reaching out and asking the question. It's an important question. With the tragedy of Robin Williams' untimely suicide, it is a big issue in the news today, and I think it needs to be paid attention to. The second thing I want you to do is, now that you've reached out and acknowledged that it's a possibility, I want you to find a professional to go talk to. I suggest you find a cognitive behavioral therapist. A cognitive behavioral therapist will help you process what's happening relative to the thought processes and the circumstantial triggers that are creating this sense of sadness or lack of motivation. The next thing I want you to do is, with that therapist, decide whether or not you should be evaluated for some low-dose medication that will help with the therapy that you're going through. Finally, and most importantly, I want you to know that the depression and sadness that you feel is temporary. It will not last forever, even though it feels like it. No matter how dark it feels, no matter how overwhelming and heavy it feels, it will pass. Much like the most severe thunderstorm, much like the most severe weather, ultimately it will pass. What we want to make sure does not happen is that you ignore the storm and allow the storm to fester and get bigger. You also want to surround yourself with people who don't enable your depression by saying, oh, poor baby, but by the same token, don't try to talk you out of it and tell you that you shouldn't feel that way. There was a book out years ago that said happiness is a choice. I believe that is true in large part, but I also believe that depression is a real and poignant emotional weight on your shoulders, and that it should not be taken lightly. If it gets to the point where you start questioning your existence on the planet, that's when you suffer from the most severe form of depression. So thank you for acknowledging it. Number 2, it's temporary. Number 3, find a therapist, cognitive behavioral therapist. Number 4, entertain the idea of talking to a physician about some low-dose antidepressant, which is just basically a leg over the wall. Doesn't mean you're going to be dependent. They're not, antidepressants are not addictive. And then finally, make sure you're monitoring your activities daily and making sure that the weight isn't getting heavier. Good luck to you. I'll keep you in my thoughts. Take care. I'm Mike Staver. Until next week, this is Mondays with Mike.